Today we finished the first full episode of our Star Trek Adventures campaign, To Know the Unknown. And that actually is the motto for the ship, or the guiding principle for the ship, that we've chosen as the theme to underpin the entire campaign. I gave them three choices: to defend those who cannot defend themselves, to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and to know the unknown. And the group has chosen that. I'm quite satisfied, as that's the one I picked as the name for the campaign. I don't think that influenced anybody's decision, but just the people involved in today's session, they know each other very well, and that's what they chose. So, all right. So the USS Crow's guiding principle will be discovery, right? The courage and the wherewithal to prize secrets out of unexplored territory. Now, when we last left our intrepid crew, they had stopped a group of warp-capable space pirates from raiding sleeper ships that were fleeing a Romulan-occupied planet. And these sleeper ships were from a planet that is a non-warp-capable species, invoking the Prime Directive. And as we closed out that last scene, everyone was coming to grips with the idea that this was a matter to be dealt with through understanding the Prime Directive. So when today's session opened up, we opened up in the conference room, which in our version of the Cheyenne class is next to the captain's ready room on Deck 7, we've decided. So we open up there. Now, understand that in the way that we are doing this, one episode of television, and we're trying to actively replicate the feel of a television series, complete with things like commercial breaks, dramatic breaks for such things, that in one of our play sessions, we do half of an episode, which means I'm going to be working on developing a pace that builds up to some kind of dramatic pitch, like a dramatic choice or a sudden reversal or something along those lines at the end of session 1, and then we have to reframe and resolve it, moving toward the climax at the end of session 2. We're not always going to be able to keep that pace, one episode of material in every 2 sessions, but we know each other pretty well. I think we're going to hit it more often than we don't. And the specific mechanics in place for the Game Master for Star Trek Adventures makes this a whole lot easier to improvise, because you have these resources sitting right in front of you. And that's one thing that I received this week, actually. I had an opportunity to treat myself. So of all the things out there that I'm interested in, I picked up the Threat and Momentum tokens from Modiphius. I ordered directly from Modiphius, as that was such a positive experience the last time. And it was once again a positive experience in terms of quick surface. These particular items were delivered by a forwarding company. So Modiphius receives your order, and then this other company dispatches it. And so within minutes of my order, what I ordered was in the mail and on its way to me, which is pretty cool. However, when I received the product, I could have been more satisfied. I've purchased acrylic products from other companies before and had a better reaction. I expected more from this product, and let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how well it's going to translate to video, but I'll try and express what it's like to see it with the naked eye. So I mentioned really good service. So we've got foam peanuts, we have bubble wrap, and all I ordered were acrylic chips and dice. There's nothing in here except that. So we'll get some of the stuff out of the way. You see this mind-bendingly pink bubble wrap. Here are the Momentum and Threat chips, and the other bubble wrap package has more 2d20 dice, this time for Mutant Chronicles, this time for the Bauhaus organization. And I might show these in this clip anyway. As you can see, the different chips come wrapped in a set of 20 threat and 6 momentum. At any given time in the game, you can have 6 momentum in the pool, accessible by all the players. Now, you can have more momentum in the moment, but you can't retain more than 6. So they give you 6 momentum tokens and 20 of the threat tokens. The tokens are designed to be looked at upside down. So you look through the body of the acrylic token to get through to what it's been etched with. So the threat tokens say alert in the style of the Next Generation, and that's as clear as I can get it because that's as clear as it looks. On this normal wooden surface, it's difficult to see. The Federation one is a little better as the token is a little clearer, but the orange threat tokens, they pretty much obscure the alert message, which is etched into its back face. With the Federation tokens, it doesn't really matter what side you're looking at, but the alert tokens, you can clearly see it's reversed on the bottom so that you can look through. So here on a piece of paper, to try and see it, it's almost completely invisible. You have to be looking straight down at it, and it's no better than you see in the camera. So it's better on a darker surface, obviously. So I've got to say I was disappointed. I had heard from a couple of different sources that there is some kind of covering over them, but it doesn't happen to be true in this case. There is nothing to peel off of them. So this is on a black surface on the top of a laptop, and that's what they look like. So I was expecting to be wowed a little bit. I've had acrylic tokens before. Federation token looks fine, but the threat token is a little underwhelming. I was disappointed considering the cost and my past experience with acrylic tokens. But this is what you get in the bag. It certainly makes the session a lot easier. People can just glance down. You don't have to talk about momentum. You don't have to talk about threat. Players can see the threat sitting there on the table and see it build and see it get spent, so they can adjust their reactions accordingly. And likewise with momentum, they can grab it up or they can distribute it among everybody else in the group. And I like it just fine. So the colors suffice. At range, that's all anybody's going to be able to see on the table anyway. One final note about quality. The momentum tokens are all the same level of translucence or coloring. The threat tokens are not. As you can see in this angle, some are actually darker than others. So your mileage may vary on that. Likely they're from different batches or what have you, but this is something that does exist. Now, just as a momentary aside, these dice are for Mutant Chronicles, but I wanted to demonstrate that unlike Star Trek Adventures, the symbol in this case replaces the 20. So if you're thinking of using different dice to mix and match, at least as far as Star Trek Adventures is concerned, that will be problematic. But I ended up getting this set because I wanted a different colored hit location dice. It would be easier to spot with the Conan dice, which was a tip I got from a commenter, and thanks very much for that. It's a great idea. Let's talk about the events of the session. When the session began, as I mentioned way back at the beginning of the video, we opened up in the conference room, and we had a fantastic, really fantastic discussion about the Prime Directive and what the crew felt their duty was to Starfleet and to this culture. And it drew upon historical records referencing all kinds of different episodes of Star Trek from, Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And it was very, very satisfying as a game master to see all of this Star Trek lore pouring out of these characters in a very believable fashion, and to have a legitimate in-character debate on what should be done, because the players didn't exactly agree when the conversation started. Now, in the scene also, we have our support character, Captain, who we had adopt a role like first season Picard, doing a lot of listening, occasionally saying no, and then being persuaded to do something else, which I think is an ideal for a support a support role character. Now, at any time, anybody could have taken on the role of the captain to deliver a differing point of view. It didn't actually happen to be necessary. The three players who were present managed to present enough of a robust argument, I think, that we're all quite satisfied. Now, as this discussion is building and working toward its conclusion, and two distinct sides are beginning to take shape, I know it's my cue as the game master of a Star Trek Adventures episode to do something. And in front of me, at this point in the session, I have 7 threat. I've got 2 for each player, and I haven't done anything with them yet. And 1 threat has been earned by the events of play. So I decide I'm going to go for something big. I haven't done this yet, and I think it will be interesting to put it at this point, because I want something quite dramatic to happen at this point. We had a dramatic opening, and I wanted to have another kind of dramatic opening that fit in with everything, so that nothing was forgotten in the episode, and that there was the sense of like an A storyline and a B storyline. And I didn't want to predict or control where those storylines were going, but I wanted to be able to manipulate what was in front of their eyes at that particular moment in time. I didn't want this debate to be allowed to play out all the way through. Something in a Star Trek episode will often interrupt the important debates so that they can be played out multiple times, from their beginning to frame the debate, their middle to where things are really being challenged. What are we really going to do? And in the end, where they have to accept what it is they decided to do under pressure. So I wanted to try and see if we could have that kind of episode. So I spent 6 threat to create a reversal, meaning I can end the scene right then and there, unfinished, and tell them what has ended the scene. So remember, we had these warp-capable space pirates, the Aquans, in the brig. So I spend my 6 points of threat, and they have escaped. Now I know who the Aquans are and what they can do. So what they have done is, now I'm going to redact some material here because the group doesn't know how they did it yet, but they do know some pieces of the puzzle. They do know that the Aquans can secrete a neurotoxin which puts someone who's been touched by it into a coma-like slumber. They can be easily roused with the right hypo spray, but they cannot be aroused naturally. So the reversal is, from the bridge comes a message into the conference room alerting them that they've got an emergency message that was cut off from the engineering crew, which is aboard the sleeper ship trying to repair its engines so that it can go back on its merry way, none the wiser for all this interference from warp-capable species. The Aquans have escaped from the brig, taken over a transporter chamber, beamed themselves to the sleeper ship, and are attempting to, subdue the engineering crew that are there. So the crew, our PC crew, leaps into action. The ops managers sent to the transporter room. The security chief is sent to the brig to assess the situation. The XO goes to the bridge and is coordinating with the captain, doing oversight. And they very quickly come up with a plan. And their plan is simply to isolate the Aquan signal, beam them right back into the brig, and in so doing, they want to disable their stolen phaser weapons and communicators, which means I get to assign a very high difficulty, see the shock that causes, and then watch them work together to try and make that happen, working in harmony with the ship's systems, being in the right place at the right time with the right support crew and the right focuses, and being willing to spend some of the momentum that they've been earning acquiring information about the Aquan escape. So the plan actually goes off without a hitch. Now, a couple of times during this particular half of the episode, they did have to succeed at cost, meaning they had to buy up a success by adding to the threat pool. And I was glad that they did after that huge expenditure of 6 points of threat. So the threat pool had seemed very large at the beginning of the episode because there was no momentum. And then as momentum is slowly accruing, it needed to be spent. And this is something I was actively trying to do during this half of the episode. Can I keep momentum flowing without building up to the point where it can obviate any of the dangers, right? Can there be enough things in the session, and especially in this second session, at the end of the episode, can there be enough things going on that using the momentum right away feels good, is fun, and feels like the characters being competent and the rewards of working together. That's the feel I was wanting to see could be generated. At the same time, I needed there to be some way to earn threat. And if they're all just working together cheerfully, there's not a lot of ways for that to happen. And if the environment is not going to change, their onboard ship way out at space next to this sleeper ship, that's not very likely either. So my main source of threat is this group of space pirates who don't like each other very much and are quite chaotic in nature, and the engineering crew. And I don't know if we went into this in great detail in the previous video, but the engineer, the chief engineer, is an NPC, and he's set up as an NPC who is not exactly thrilled with the command crew. So while he's definitely a member of the team and will pull in the right direction under duress, there is a bit of an adversarial relationship going on there. So he's built as an NPC who generates threats. And so while he will follow orders, it builds up a certain amount of animosity between the departments. And something is, of course, going to have to be done about this in the future of the campaign. But for right now, it's an interesting way to explore the social dynamics of how all of us who are playing in the campaign feel about what is a Starfleet crew. Are we leaning toward something more like Deep Space Nine, where there's a lot of friction between different characters, or are we looking for something more like The Next Generation, where there's very little friction between characters, unless it's of the romantic kind? So they beam them to the brig, and then they begin their investigation. How are they able to escape? And in the background is this looming problem of what are we going to do about this civilization who has sent its sleeper ships to the stars in order to escape the Romulans. And some of the highlights were that, well, the civilization has already been tainted by a warp-capable species. At least we should try and put it back together. So that was easy to address in terms of the pilots, or the pirates' influence, because all the sleepers are still asleep. And so the ship can be restored, its computers can be adjusted to not show any sign of delay or any of this other stuff going on, and the replicators can be fine-tuned so that the replacement parts that they use to repair the ships don't stand out. That was the easy part. What do we do about where they came from? What do we do about the unlikelihood of them actually reaching the place they're trying to go? Their course and the desperate nature of it, of hurling themselves to the stars, trying to propagate their species and their culture, calls to the characters, I think. And it's so unlikely to succeed. They felt motivated to do something about it. And that's primarily what we argued about. Do we let them go, or do we help? And there was talk of actually taking them to their destination and adjusting their computer record so it seemed like it took as long as they thought it was going to take, and that sort of stuff. But in the end, all they did was fine-tune their course so they had a higher probability of reaching their destination and trusting to fate that they could get there. And to make that have a dramatic payoff, I asked the player who's running the XO, I asked Lawrence to give us the executive officer's log, much like you'd expect in a real episode of Star Trek. Some kind of commentary, some kind of punctuating dramatic point on what it is that the crew has done. And he did. And it was powerful. And we're sitting there and we're all really happy. We're all really smiling. And, you know, we interjected it a few times along the way, you know, poking at him. It's like, well, where is this happening? So, you know, interrupt him and he has to go back and start again. And so it's happening in my quarters. And then he started up again and hit him just a moment later. It's like, well, what does it look like? And he has to describe his Betazoid furnishings. And then finally we let him deliver his speech. And so with those two interruptions, it took on maybe more urgency, but we had a good sense of camaraderie in the room. And then we have this excellent log report about their decision and how they wanted to address the Prime Directive and what is ahead of them. And so they decided that they were going to keep the Aquans prisoner, keep these pirates prisoner. Now that they have been able to ascertain where their homeworld is, they're going to return them to that homeworld and make their first contact in this uncharted region of space from the Federation's perspective with prisoners in tow. And what will that exploration of culture entail? And that is for a future episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this recap and reflections video, complete with a little insertion of a under the hood product sampling in the middle, and we'll see you next time.